Annual Committee with current and former residents of Herculaneum. Today we have with us is Jim Kasten.
Are you a resident of Herculaneum at the present time?
Yes, I am.
How long have you resided in Herculaneum?
I've lived here basically all my life. I came to town as an infant, and then other than the time that I was in college or in the Navy, I've lived in Herculaneum all 58 years of my life.
When did you first come to be a resident of Herculaneum?
I'm sorry?
When did you first come to be a resident of Herculaneum?
1950.
Wow.
What are the name of your parents?
My father's name was Oscar A. Bud Kasten, and my mother's was Emma Kasten, but she went by Imogene. She was the school nurse here for 20 years.
Are they from Herculaneum, and did they attend the Herculaneum schools?
My father was a lifetime resident of Herculaneum. He grew up just over by the firehouse where I grew up, basically, in my grandparents' old house. He graduated from high school in 1934 here. My mother's from Ellenville, New York, and they met when they were in the Navy in the World War II.
Do you have any siblings, and did they go to school here?
I have a brother, Ed, who's 2 years behind me in school, and he went to school here, and then I have a sister, Pat, who graduated in '69, so she was 3 years behind me.
Do you have any children who grew up in Herculaneum and or attended Herculaneum?
Yes, my wife and I have 3 children that attended Herculaneum. Aaron, our oldest child, graduated in '93, and Carrie, our middle daughter, graduated in '95, and then Coach Ryan Kasten is our youngest son, and our youngest child, he graduated in 1997.
How many generations of your family have lived in Herculaneum?
As best I remember, my grandfather is the first generation, my grandfather and grandmother, and then my parents and us, and then my children. So whatever that is for.
Where in Herculaneum have you resided?
Well, I grew up on Broad Street in Herculaneum, which is my father's childhood home, and where my mother just moved from last month. And then I lived, when I first got married and got out of college, my wife and I moved to 988 South Main Street, which is also in the buyout area. Those homes aren't down there anymore. And our children, we raised our 3 children until 1985, and then we moved to our present day address, 824 Lake Drive, over by the golf course.
Can you recall any families that lived in your neighborhood?
Well, growing up, yeah, there was lots of kids that we had to play with. I mean, back in those days, you left the house first thing in the morning, and you might come home for lunch, or you might eat lunch at a friend's house, and your parents would see you that evening, and at supper time. Sometimes the kids would be in our neighborhood, sometimes we'd go elsewhere, but Kenny Martin lived across. We had a reservoir, it's Doe Run's Reservoir, and it had a big fence around it, and we could fish out of it. Sometimes there'd be some big old catfish, and we'd stick our cane poles through there, and sometimes we caught 10, 12, 15-pound catfish out of there. We'd get them up on the bank and pull the poles back and scoop underneath the fence. We played Indian ball in our side yard, and when we were young, we couldn't hit it over the fence from our side yard. So the goal was, if you hit it over the fence into the reservoir, it was a home run. Well, as we got older, you could hit it over there every time. So then the trick was, if you hit it over there, it's an out. But if you hit it against the fence and it doesn't get caught by the outfielder, then it was a home run. So everybody played in our side yard. In fact, one time we played Indian ball with Warren Hearns, who was running for the governor of the state of Missouri, he came up there, and us kids were out there playing, and he stopped in. They were having a little political caucus in our basement, and he stopped before he went inside to the big meeting and took his coat and tie off, and he's out there playing Indian ball with us, and so I thought that was kind of unique, kind of neat. But some other guys that lived in our neighborhood, Charlie Plummer, Larry Brewer, the Bobby and Charlie Simpson lived, and that was just up on our hill that we lived on. We lived right up from the Doe Run. But then we played a lot with the Paggi kids and the Todds and Gene Carr and all those kids, Daryl Shy, all those kids, Coach Helms lived in town, and we were always playing ball games, playing ball or sleigh riding, and I mean we were always outside doing stuff. And then we had what we called the golf course kids, and that was Coach Drennan and Jimmy and Tommy Coleman and Narvel Brown, Melvin Brown. All those guys lived out by the golf course, so there was, we always wanted to go out there because at the golf course there was lots of fun stuff to do. I mean, you could play over in the woods or play on the golf course and fish in the ponds and do all kinds of fun things over there.
Did you or any of your family members work in Herculaneum?
Well, my grandfather worked for Doe Run. He was a manager. I don't know what department, but he worked at Doe Run. All my great uncles, his brothers, all worked for Doe Run. My father worked at Doe Run when he was going to college, and then my mother, like I said earlier, my mother worked for the school district. I taught at the school district in the 70s and coached there, and then have coached here since then on a part-time basis. My son Ryan, again, coaches here, teaches here. I'm trying to think. My aunt, Lois, my dad's sister, was a PE, was a teacher here, taught English and PE, and actually helped coach one of the boys' athletic teams during World War II. Whenever the male coach got drafted and had to go into the service, she was one of the coaches on the boys' side of the sports. So that's pretty much all that's worked here in town.
Do you remember what your wages were?
I think my first teaching wage was, with coaching football, was right around $6,000. We made $300 to coach football back then. It's probably not a whole lot more than that now, but coaching is a profession that you got to do because you like to do it. It's not for the pay, it's for the love of being around the kids in the sport.
Where have you worked during your adult life?
Well, during my adult life, I worked while I was going to college. Well, I was going to college and in the Navy for the first 3.5, 4 years after high school. Then I worked, after I got out of the Navy, I was still going to college and working part-time. I worked for Trask Moving and Storage down in Cape Girardeau and went to school part-time. And in the summers I worked with electrical contractors as what they call a white-collar electrician, which was an electrician's helper. So we'd go to big jobs and we would help the electricians and get paid the same salary they did, which was, back then, was about $7 an hour, which was pretty good money.
Did any of your family members own or operate a business in Herculaneum?
Not that I know of. Well, my wife's a real estate agent and works out of her home. And going back, I guess I didn't finish the question about jobs. After I got out of college, then I got my teaching certificate and teaching degree, and I came to Herculaneum. That was my first job. I interviewed with my elementary principal for the job, William Freeman, who was probably the most intelligent person I have ever met in my entire life. He was just an outstanding, this is Jimmy Freeman's grandfather, so you know Jimmy. And anyway, he was just an outstanding teacher and administrator. He was very strict, very disciplined. And so anyway, I got the job, and I worked, I taught junior high science and algebra, and coached football and track in Herky for 4 years. And then I went to Windsor, where I coached for 3 years and taught high school math and physics up there. And then I went to work at H.W. Harold Distributing, which is in Imperial, which is my uncle's business. And since then, my cousin has taken it over, and I've worked there since 1979.
Did you attend elementary school in Herculaneum?
Yes, I went all the way through school. I attended actually in what is the teacher's lounge now, was the art room a few years back, was the kindergarten, and that's where I went to kindergarten. And then the next year there was a building just north of this building right here, or I guess east of this building, and it was part of it was a classroom where there was first and second graders in there, and I was a first grader in there with a split classroom with some second graders. And in the other half of the building was they sold goods out of there. There was like a co-op store in there. And then the cafeteria, the old cafeteria, was right about here where we're right below in this ground here where this building sits. And they had a co-op store in the base of it. And all the kids in the whole school district came to this cafeteria. Even the elementary kids had to walk from the Roy Taylor building over to here for lunch every day, come rain or snow or sleet. It was kind of an experience. But then in the second grade, then we moved over to the Roy E. Taylor building, and I was there until 8th grade, and then I came over here into this building, and then graduated from the old high school.
What building is the Roy Taylor building?
It's the elementary building that's on the other side of the practice field here, that's being used for, I guess it's, the county's using it as a special district co-op kind of thing.
Do you recall any of your teachers or principals from your elementary school days?
Oh yes, I had really great teachers. Mr. Freeman was the principal, and he was an imposing figure. I mean, he was nearly as big as Jimmy, and 6'3", 6'4", probably 250 pounds, and he walked in the hallways, always wore suit, coat, sports coat, tie, white shirt, kind of disheveled. His tie would be open, and shirt tail might be out. He wasn't really worried about appearances. He was a very confident man, and he walked with a meter stick, and he would click that meter stick on the hallway floor as he walked down the hall, or he'd slap it on his leg. And if you were a child in that school, you knew he was coming, and I mean to tell you, you straightened right up. He just was a fantastic gentleman. And some of the teachers we had over there that I really appreciated, Mrs. Thomas was my 7th grade teacher. She was just a fantastic lady. Mrs. Burris, whenever the school integrated, Mrs. Burris was the black teacher that came from the black school, and she was my 6th grade homeroom teacher, and she taught art and 6th grade homeroom. So whenever she was in art class, Mr. Freeman actually taught my math and my history that year, our 6th grade year. I had a Mrs. Wirchin, was my 2nd grade teacher, and she was really outstanding. And that was when we first learned to make change, and we had a little mock store in our room where we had candy bar wrappers, and we'd take turns being the store owner or the customer. I don't know, I don't know if kids do that kind of stuff anymore, but it was kind of fun, to think that you were growing up. Mrs. Porchy was my 3rd grade teacher, an outstanding lady, and one of her daughters ended up being a teacher later on, and then her son-in-law was a teacher and a coach here. Gene Myers was the basketball coach when I came through school, and the algebra teacher. So all those folks in elementary school were a big part of a lot of our lives, but it was very disciplined, very strict environment.
Do you recall any special events, local or national, that occurred during your elementary school days?
Well, elementary, I think we had our first man in space. It seems like I remember seeing it. There was one of these signs, these electrical flashing signs, and we were going. I want to say we were going to the zoo or something. I have a vague memory of this, and they flashed on there that we sent our first man up into space, even though it was just one of them, up in space and splash into the water. That happened during my elementary days. I was always politically minded, so I paid attention to the elections, and 56 and 52, well, not 52 so much, but 56 was the elections of President Eisenhower beat Adlai Stevenson, and then in 60 when John Kennedy was elected president, a Democratic president. That was big in my family because my dad was a political Democratic leader in the county. So those things were kind of relevant to me. And then later on, when President Kennedy was killed, I was actually a sophomore in high school. And I think anybody that lived during that time that was old enough to have a vivid memory of that could tell you exactly where they were when that moment occurred. I mean, and I was sitting in study hall, and they came across the loudspeaker, the principal did, and said, in Dallas today, President Kennedy's been shot. And then 10 minutes later, they came across and said he was pronounced dead, and that was pretty traumatic for all of us at that time. The other events that happened, the Cardinals won the World Series in '64. That was pretty big. August Bush bought the Cardinals in my early elementary years, and that kind of was a relevant thing that brought the Cardinals back to prominence in the city. The football Cardinals moved from Chicago down to St. Louis. That was a big event. I guess those were the things that stick out most in my mind that come off the top of my head right
now. Do you recall any of your teachers, principals, or counselors from your high school days?
Oh yes, I had wonderful teachers. We had a lady, Mrs. Hilda Kaufman, and her son was a year ahead of me in school, a good friend of mine. Actually, she was my kindergarten teacher, and then later on was my junior and senior English teacher. She went back to school and wanted to teach in the high school. So she was really important in our life. She was our class sponsor in our play. She was in charge of the junior and senior plays and the junior prom and our senior trip. So she was just an outstanding lady that gave a lot of her time to the kids. She didn't have to, she just did. Mr. Horton was our building principal the last 2 years I was here. He was another outstanding figure in the community and put in 20 plus years as a building principal here. Still comes to a lot of the sporting events. My math teacher, I really admired him. He was an excellent algebra teacher, and one of the people that motivated me to want to go on to be a teacher, be a math teacher. I actually used his teaching model as my own when I did become a teacher. And probably two of the most predominant people was Coach Bill Holmes, who was our football coach and the PE teacher here. He was just a charismatic person, a great coach, and Coach Dick Cook. I don't know if you remember Coach Cook. He came back and helped us with track a few years. He was my B-team football coach and my 10th grade history teacher. And he was probably one of the ones that most wanted me to be a teacher because of the way he connected with kids and just carried himself. So I was blessed, and all of us, I think, were at that time to have lots of caring teachers. A guy named Herb Breen was a guy that stayed, he was a football coach, stayed after school with us kids and played basketball or football or did whatever, just so that we had a place to be and a place to hang out and get exercise. He'd open the gym up for us. And so we were lucky back then to have those kind of people that wanted to give up their free time and lives to help kids.
Do you recall any special events, local or national, that occurred in your high school years?
Well, I mentioned, I guess, President Kennedy being killed and the Cardinals winning the World Series. They built Busch Stadium in 1965. I was still in school then. Lots of political turmoil going on. Vietnam War started, and so that was a troubling time for a lot of young people. The draft, friends of mine were getting drafted. I had already decided I was going to make a career in the Navy, and actually was appointed to the Naval Academy and went there for several years. So, I was on the military side of it, but really was not that much in favor of the Vietnam War, the whole crisis. But those were big issues. Civil rights movement was big at that time. Even though we had integrated our schools, it wasn't, and it was accepted here in our community. A lot of communities around the country, it was not an accepted thing, and minorities, the blacks were treated unfairly, and so there was a movement all over the country to gain votes for the minorities and gain rights, civil rights for those folks. So those were big issues back in those days.
What type of activities did you participate in while attending school and sports?
Well, I was involved in a lot of stuff. I played football. I played junior high basketball. I played football all 4 years. I was in the FBLA. I was vice president of that. I was in the Industrial Arts Club. I don't know if they still have one of those. The shop club. I was also in student council 1 year. I was in the National Honor Society, and I ran track 1 year. And in the plays, and those kind of things.
Did you participate in any clubs or organizations outside of school?
I was in Boy Scouts, and that was back in our days. Boy Scouts were big, and it's probably a little different than that now. But back then, almost every young man was in Boy Scouts. We had troops. Our troop was 30 or 40 kids, big, and we went all over the country. I mean, we started in Cub Scouts, and then in as 11-year-olds, we were in the Boy Scouts, and we went took hikes on trails on Boy Scout trails in Tennessee and Kentucky and Illinois and all over the state of Missouri. And in fact, the summer of my 8th grade year, we went to Philmont, New Mexico, to the Philmont Scout Ranch in New Mexico. Coach Drennan and I were actually tent partners and best friends, and still best friends. But when we were down there, it was a 2-week hike through the mountains in New Mexico, the hills and valleys and mountains of New Mexico. One night, the leaders were out of the camp, and a brown bear came into the campsite, and they were yelling. The kids were yelling for the leaders, and nobody answered. And the bear was rooting through the food, and somebody yelled, "Somebody go get the leaders!" Well, Coach Drennan, he says, "I'll go," and he jumps out of the tent and he's running to get the leaders. And I'm thinking, well, I'm not staying in this tent by myself. So we go tearing out across the campground, and the bear, as we kind of went around the tent, the bear was there. He was like face to face to us, and we immediately did an about face and dove into another kid's tent, and he thought we were the bear, and it was kind of a touchy situation. And sometimes I look back on that, and I kind of wonder if those leaders hadn't set something up. It was like, was that really a bear, or was that one of those leaders in some kind of costume? Because just kind of coincidentally, they weren't there at the time when the bear showed up. I don't know.
Do you remember any of the individuals that participated in the Boy Scouts with you?
Coach Drennan was in Scouts with me. Like I said, just about everybody back then. Melvin Brown. Our leaders were Wallace O'Shea and Norval Brown, and then later on Bob Francis. But Ronnie Crater, Terry Todd, Steve Drennan, Gene Carr, Butch Hilly, trying to think of all these guys, Jim Torrance, my younger brother Ed, and like I say, almost everybody in the town was a scout, and we went all over the place. Wayne Kelly, Bobby Booyer, Robert. We have a Robert A. Booyer and a Robert D. Booyer. And we had the two Booyer boys. So it was a lot of fun.
As an adult, have you participated in any civic or social organizations, been involved in any elected positions in Herculaneum?
Yes, partly because of all the great people that were adults in my life. They gave up so much. It just seemed only right and fair that you should give back to the next generation or the next group. And because of that, I've been involved. I was a Little League coach, a YMCA soccer coach. I coached for the Jefferson County Jets track program. I helped with the YMCA and other sports, the Taekwondo, when my son went through that. I belong to Herculaneum Today and Tomorrow. It's a non-for-profit civic organization that Bill belongs to, and we do a lot of good things. We're presently getting ready to do a trim grant where we're going to plant 200 trees for our 200-year celebration. We're going to partner with Dill Run and with the city, and in late April we're going to dedicate a 200-plus-year-old tree. And that's kind of neat when you think about it. There's some trees in this town that have been here longer than we have, and we're going to go dedicate those trees. So I've been involved in that. I'm on the park board, and I was the city treasurer in Herculaneum for 24 years. I just recently resigned from that post, and I'm running for school board in April this year.
Do you remember any past clergy who served in Herculaneum churches?
Well, when I grew up, I was an Episcopalian, which there wasn't an Episcopal church in Herculaneum at the time. Actually, where the firehouse is now was the old Episcopal church, and the congregation just dwindled down. So the Episcopal church that I attended was in DeSoto. And then after I got married and our kids, my wife was Lutheran, and our kids were baptized as Lutherans, and I joined the Lutheran church in Peebly. But I don't really remember many clergymen in the Herculaneum area, because I didn't go to church in Herculaneum.
While you were growing up, do you remember any businesses or popular stores around?
Well, yes, there was, the whole area's changed. There was the downtown area, which is no longer there. There was a drugstore, there was a grocery store, there was a couple hardware stores, there was a post office, a barber shop, Donnelly's Barber Shop, there was a laundromat, a couple taverns, there was a sporting goods store, and a TV appliance store. So that whole area down there was just full of businesses. There were almost every opening in those buildings was some sort of business. And then there were some apartments down there as well. There was a bank at one time, but not in I don't remember that as a child. I think that was gone before I started remembering those things.
Do you remember the locations or any of the owners?
Well, like I said, they were all right in that area on one side of the street, the other. The grocery store, Jimmy House, I'm not sure if he was the owner of it, but he ran it, or he was the manager. I remember him. He was a real nice gentleman. He was one of the founders of our AMVETS group downtown, or down here in Herculaneum. Tiny Torrance owned the tavern. Sida Clue owned the TV repair shop. Mr. Feck, who was, I'm not sure what country he came from, but he still had a real distinct dialect of a foreign country. Real nice man. Owned the hardware store. Butch Rapp owned a insurance business down there. Norman Shelley, I think, owned the drugstore. Those are kind of the ones I remember. Tacky Douglas owned a liquor store, fishing tackle kind of thing at one time. Jim Donnelly, his father owned the barbershop, and then Jim himself ran it for years after his father passed away. Those are the ones that I remember.
Who do you consider the influential individuals or community leaders during your time in Herculaneum?
Growing up, well, the first mayor was a gentleman by the name of Don Stotler. He was in Mr. Kelly, I can't think of his first name right now. Him and Tommy Robart, Bill Haggard's father, Glenn Haggard, my dad, Bud Kasten. They were all prominent figures in the town that did things for the community. They were firemen. They started the AMVETs. Although my dad wasn't involved so much in city politics, but those other gentlemen were involved in the city government. They were prominent figures. The president of Doe Run, back then, a man named Sherman was a prominent figure, and then later on, a guy named Bob Peppers was the plant manager, and he was prominent in Scouts. And then our Scout leaders, Mr. O'Shea and Mr. Brown and Mr. Francis, were prominent in the community.
Do you remember any colorful characters or individuals that everyone knew in Herculaneum?
Well, there was a guy named Gar Dunnigan, and I don't know if others have talked about Gar, but he, in the stories, were kind of vague, but he was a lawyer, a very intelligent man, but they say when his wife died, he kind of lost interest in the society in general. So he kind of lived in the house. Actually, he lived in the house on the lot that I lived in on 988 South Main Street. They'd leveled the house by this point in time and built another little shed back there in the back. I think Larry Brewer's dad might have built that house for Gar, and over time my great uncles had bought the lot, and then that's where we put our trailer and then eventually a modular home there. But Gar lived in this rundown house that us kids all thought was haunted or something, and he walked around in a suit. He always wore a suit and tie, but again the tie was, and there would be stains and spots on it, and his suit was just tattered and torn, and you'd see him in the tavern. I guess he still even conducted some sort of business, but he was kind of a character. And then another nice old gentleman that was kind of Luther Byington was kind of a fixer-upper kind of guy. He would do odd jobs in people's homes, and kind of had some talent in terms of ability, carpenter work or painting, those kind of things, and really a nice old gentleman. And Mr. Dunnigan was a nice guy too. He just was a little different. Those are the people that I probably most remember as being a little bit on this not of the norm, so to speak.
Do you remember any unusual nicknames of individuals in Herculaneum?
Oh shoot! Well, I don't know. Gar Dunnigan, I guess would that's pretty unusual. There was well, I don't know if I should. There was a guy named Dum Dum that was his nickname, and there was several Butches. Butch Copeland and Butch Hilly. I don't know how unique that is, but those guys were characters in themselves. Not so much Butch Hilly, but Butch Copeland was kind of a unique guy. He was an outstanding athlete here, and then later rode a motorcycle and was kind of a rough character, I guess would be a good word for Butch. Good guy, just had a rough appearance.
Do you remember any local names for different parts of the town?
Oh yeah, there's the area right over here behind where the new central office is going to be. That was called Concrete Town, and that got its name from all the houses that were made out of concrete. Now that was where Butch Copeland lived, and the rough kids lived. The tough kids lived over there, and the rest of us pretty much stayed out of there. And we would ride our bikes through there only if we had to. Coach Helms was from that area, and Butch and Butch's brothers, and Coach Helms's brothers were all pretty tough characters, and so that was kind of different. And then you know, the south end of town, I guess, was just the south end of town, and so that those, I mean, anywhere else in the town was okay to go, except you didn't want to go to Concrete Town unless you had protection or something. So, and then the scenic drive area, the golf course area, that's the golf course, and that's, you know, we called it that.
Do you recall any man-made or natural disasters that affected the city of Herculaneum?
Well, the floods of '93 and '95 were very significant. I mean, the whole areas of the town were just underwater for weeks on end, and many trees died from that. Buildings are no longer in existence because of some of those floods. You know, the access in and out of town was really stifled because of the floodwaters. And then, you know, we've got the EPA in town because of the run, the lead, you know, the lead scare, the lead contamination, and so, you know, those are all things that have affected how the town. I mean, just the lead thing in itself over the last 5 years, that whole area of town was my playground where I grew up. My childhood home is no longer there. There's just, you know, dirt that's going to have grass and trees growing in it, and because, you know, the EPA and MDR came in and said, well, we got to buy these folks out. So that's affected the town in a big way. I can't think of anything. Well, just the expansion of the town too. I guess that would be man-made. We annexed parts to the west, and developers have come in and put in all these homes and businesses out there by 55. And someday that's probably going to be the new main street of Herculaneum. If the federal government comes in and puts in the new South Bridge that goes over the top of the hill behind Buck Heights, then that whole area is going to open up as a corridor into the city, where businesses are going to flourish on either side of that. More and more houses will be built on the other side of 55. And eventually someday down on the south end of town where the South Bridge is, there could be other businesses put in down there. So things are going to change a lot because of the man-made or the natural disasters.
What do you recall about Christmas Day in 1947 fire that destroyed the public school?
Well, I wasn't born yet.
Okay. Sorry.
But my father relates some stories. In fact, I think the fire department answered the call to the fire, and he actually hurt his back somehow. I can vaguely remember the story of how he hurt his back doing something in the fire, whether they were trying to pull some wreckage out or tear some things apart, but strained something in his back. That's about all I can remember. Our victory bell is the best I can tell from the story that I remember of that. Actually hung in the entrance of about where the old building is now. And during that fire, it crashed down to the ground, and it was set aside for many years. And then eventually, Coach Holmes, who was coach when I was in school, brought it back, and we named it the Victory Bell, and it sits out there where it sits. Well, it sat in front of the high school for a long time, and then down there.
Growing up in Herculaneum, where did you hang out with your friends?
Well, we had a teen town sometimes. Later on, that was down at the end of town was I think KP Hall, if I'm correct, and so that was a place. There was a teen town over in Peevely as well, so kids hung out over there. You know, when we were younger, before we were teens and could drive around, we did we played lots of ball out in the practice field, lots down by the Little League fields. The Dugans had a big field, John and Frank, by their house, and we played football up there. And we went to the golf course a lot. We fished in the creek and played in the slag piles behind Old Run that you can't get to now because they got it fenced in. Went over across the trestle behind Old Run to the caves or the bluffs over behind Old Run. When we were kids, they called those, we knew them as Jesse James's caves because people told us that Jesse James hung out there, which wasn't true, I don't believe, but we all thought it was true. And then I can remember my great uncles taking us over there, and people that would have shot bullets and left shells over there, just target practice and whatever. And my great uncle would pick those up and he says, "These are Jesse James's bullets." And so my brother and I thought we really had something, and we'd collect them and take them home. And so those were fun times. We hung out a lot over there, climbed on those bluffs and climbed in those caves, and picked blackberries over there off those hills. And then as we got older and had cars to travel, there were several like hamburger stands that teens hung out in. Lotta Burger and Biggie Burger were the names of them, and so kids. And then Stoplight, where Stoplight is now, they had curbside service. So they had young teenagers would come out and wait on you at your car. So a lot of teens would sit in their cars and get a burger and socialize, from one car to the next or across the parking lot. That's where teens hung out.
What type of activities did you and your friends enjoy doing in your teen years?
In what years?
Your teen years.
In teens. Well, we dated a lot. Kids went to movies. We hung out in those hamburger places, like I said, in those parking lots. We like to fish and hunt and do those kinds of things. Go to the ball games. We were involved in sports, all of us, and in our class plays. They had dances at school. We'd go to those kind of things.
This one? Okay. Do you remember any special memories of the Mississippi River or Joachim Creek?
Yes, we did a lot of fishing down there, and I can remember one time. I was older, actually married, and my friend Gene Carr, who still works at Doe Run. He'd come call me and say, "Hey, one of the guys at work said they caught their limit and fish out of part of Joachim or out of the Mississippi." Said we need to go. So I'd tell my wife, we were just first young married guys, and I'd tell my wife, said, "We're going fishing down to the creek. Gene says they're really biting." So we'd go down, and we wouldn't catch anything. I mean, we'd fish all night long and come home about 4 in the morning and not have caught anything. And well, naturally that got a question the next morning. Well, what do you mean you fished all night but didn't catch anything? So then one time we finally did catch one little bitty catfish like that, and Gene wanted to throw it back, but I said, "No, I got to take it home for proof that I was actually down here fishing." So, but we had a lot of fun down there. We never did really swim in either of those creeks whenever I was a kid, but a lot of fishing and just hanging out.
Where'd you go shopping while you were growing up? Did you have your own car?
I used my parents' car. I didn't have my own car. We weren't very well off. My mom actually didn't start working outside the home until I was a sophomore in high school. So we just lived on one salary, which wasn't that big. So we just had one family car, and if my dad wasn't using it, then I got to use it. Luckily, I had friends that all had cars, and so I could go with them. So I wasn't much of a shopper, but we used to go up to what is now Sunset Hills area 44 in Lindbergh area, and they had a store called EJ Corvette, and we go up there and we shop up in that area. And actually, we'd go up and I won't go there. Next question.
Do you have any special memories of the following? I got a long list. The Herculaneum Bowling Alley, the KP Hall, the Veneta Theater, the Campus Inn, Teen Town, the high school co-op store, the school carnivals, the Herculaneum Annual Homecoming.
I have memories of all those things. The memory of the co-op store, I guess I was in the 3rd grade, and that behind the co-op, after we get to eat, you could go down the co-op. You had a few minutes before you had to go back and be back over to elementary to be to class. And so I remember going down there, and the high school boys played a game called Stretch, where they took an ice pick and threw it, and you stretched the person's feet out. And so I thought that was a pretty neat game, so I went home and was going to teach my little brother, who was 1st grader, how to play stretch with an ice pick. Well, I threw it into his foot, and so my parents said, well, where'd you learn that game? And I said, well, I learned it from the high school kids at the high school. Well, needless to say, that was the end of they called the school, and the school put an end to it. But I never did let them find out that it was me, or probably I'd have got squashed by those older guys. So, but that was one memory. I mean, we went to the dances at the KP Hall, and the bowling alley. A lot of my friends worked in the bowling alley. They were pin boys, where they actually set the pins. Now I never did that, but there was a window right at the side of the building where you could look into the back of the building where these guys stood and sat. And I can remember a lot of times just, a bunch of us would sit there and talk to the guys through the window while they worked, and it was really kind of a hot, dirty job back there, but it was kind of a cool job, I guess, but I never did it.
Do you have any remembrances of the time when Herculaneum public schools were integrated?
Yes, they integrated. I guess I want to say my 4th or 5th grade year, and the unique thing about Herculaneum, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, is that, and it's always been that way, because I don't know if it's just the kind of people we are, but Herculaneum people in the school has been very accepting of everybody. When black people and white people came together, that just was a simple thing to do. It just meshed quickly, and there was never a problem. Another thing about that community, about that meshing, is when I went to school here, the kids from Antonio that now go to Seckman High School came here to high school. There was a Lutheran school in Peevely, and those kids came here. There was a Peevely Elementary Junior High and a Herky Elementary Junior High. So we meshed 4 8th grade classes, well actually 5, because a lot of the kids that went to the Assumption Catholic school that didn't end up going to St. Pius came to Herky. So we had 5 elementary buildings meshing into one, and it never seemed like there was ever a problem. It was like, the first couple of days it was like you might be feeling people out, like, well, who's the toughest guy, and who's the cutest girl or the cutest guy, or who's the leaders of this or that. But then after a few days, we were all just Herculaneum students, and it was kind of neat growing up like that, because you never had factions or bickering groups. We were all one, with one set goal, with one vision of school and of where we were coming from or going to, and it was kind of neat experience. In fact, I married a girl from Antonio. She went to high school with me. She was a year younger than me, but she came from a different area of town or the county into our school, and there was a lot of that that went on back then, where people were accepting of each other, even though we came from different backgrounds, different groups.
Did you serve in the military?
Yes, I was. When I got out of high school, I'd already received my appointment to the Naval Academy, and so right after, like 2 days after my 18th birthday, I was sworn into the Navy. I was active duty and was in the Navy for 3.5 years active duty and 2 years in the reserves.
Go ahead.
Do you have any remembrances of the Korean War or the Vietnam War during your time in Herculaneum?
None during the Korean War. That happened as I was an infant. Although I knew people that were in the Korean War, older gentlemen, and listened to their stories. But the Vietnam War is real. I mean, we grew up during that time. My classmates, and kids that were on either side of me in school all either fought in the war, or in fact, I had a very good friend, Jimmy Coleman, that was killed in Vietnam, and played football with him, was in scouts with him, and did all kinds of stuff. And so, you know, the Vietnam War was really important for my generation in many ways. I mean, we were the ones that were involved. We were the age group that was involved. Kids, friends of mine, protested the war. I was in the service, so I couldn't really do that. But while I was in the service, everything that a lot of the stuff we talked about, all the drills that we did and all the preparation we did were wartime drills and wartime preparation. I mean, when we were at sea, we were on alert basically all the time. So it was, very relevant to us.
Were you enlisted? Did you enlist voluntarily, or?
Yes, I wanted to be in the Navy at the time, and so I applied for that appointment and received it.
What's your fondest memory of growing up in Herculaneum?
Oh my goodness. I guess just knowing that people, adults around me, cared about me. I think I had loving parents and grandparents. I had a great aunt and 2 great uncles that none of them ever got married, lived together, but down on the south end of town. That we spent a lot of time down there with those folks in the summertime. My brother and I had other aunts and uncles and relatives, and grandparents that did things with us or did things for us, and neighboring adults, teachers and coaches and administrators at school. All those people were willing to share their time and energy with the kids, and so I just always felt real safe and real secure, loved, I guess is maybe the word, and so I mean the whole experience was pretty good for me. I loved going to school here.
In summary, how would you sum up your life in Herculaneum?
Well, I just about said it. It's great life. My friends are all here. My childhood friends, Gene Carr, Steve Drennan, Stan Helms, my brother Ed, my sister, all live here. My kids live in 2 of the 3 live in the nearby area. My mom still lives here. It's just been, it's been great because, you can grow up and be anything you want to be, but if you're not happy doing it, or you're not with people that you care about or care about you, then it's kind of shallow. So, those things have always, made my experience in Herculaneum really rewarding for me, and I think that's the main thing, is that, I've got to share that with people that are important to me.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. You guys did great.